The evening air inside the hotel lobby carried the soft sound of chatter, laughter, and the gentle clinking of glasses. It was one of those elegant places where everything seemed perfect: polished marble floors, golden chandeliers, and people dressed in clothes that looked more expensive than some cars. In the middle of all the shining faces and glittering lights stood a man known to almost everyone there. He was wealthy, confident, and always surrounded by people who laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. He owned several companies and his word carried weight. He enjoyed attention, and most of all, he enjoyed being the one in control. The event that night was a charity dinner, a gathering meant to raise money for young musicians. The irony was that most of the guests cared little about the cause. They were there to be seen, to show off, to build connections that would serve their own interests later. Among the guests and performers were waiters and waitresses moving quietly, making sure everything stayed perfect. One of them was a woman named Clara. She was in her late 20s, wearing a simple uniform that blended into the background. She worked quietly, barely noticed, always polite and careful not to draw attention. But there was something different about her that night. Every time she walked past the grand piano sitting on the stage, her eyes lingered on it for a second longer than they should have. It was as if the piano called out to her, like an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. The evening went smoothly until halfway through, when the host stood up to announce the next performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a cheerful smile, "we were supposed to have a young pianist perform one of her pieces tonight. Unfortunately, she's feeling unwell and won't be able to play." The crowd sighed, disappointed, though many didn't care much. It was just another part of the event for them. The host looked around awkwardly, trying to think of a way to fill the time. "If anyone here can play," he joked, "the stage is yours." A few people laughed. The rich man sitting near the front leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Maybe one of the waiters can entertain us," he said loud enough for those around him to hear. Everyone chuckled. Clara froze. Her heart pounded. She had played piano all her life before life took a turn she hadn't planned. She had given up performing years ago. After losing everything that once gave her stability, now she only played in her mind, during quiet moments before sleep. But when she heard the host's words and saw the empty piano, something inside her stirred. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she held the tray. Then, without really thinking it through, she set the tray down on a nearby table and walked toward the stage. The crowd noticed her right away. The laughter faded as she climbed the small set of steps. The host blinked, unsure what was happening. "Miss, do you play?" he asked gently, surprised. Clara nodded. "A little," she said softly. The rich man's smirk widened. He whispered to his companion, "This should be interesting. The waitress thinks she can play." His voice dripped with sarcasm, and a few people near him chuckled again. Clara heard it, but she didn't react. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she focused on the piano in front of her. It was a beautiful black grand shining under the lights. She hadn't touched one like it in years. For a moment, fear nearly made her turn back. What if she failed? What if they laughed even harder? But then she remembered why she once loved music. It wasn't to impress anyone. It was to speak when words couldn't. She sat down slowly, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. The room went quiet. Conversation stopped. Even the waiters paused in their steps. The first notes came softly, like a whisper carried by the wind. At first it was simple and uncertain, as though she was finding her way back into something she had lost. Then, little by little, the melody began to take shape. The sound grew fuller, richer, deeper. The rich man's smirk faded. He leaned forward slightly, his expression changing from amusement to confusion, and then to something else: curiosity. Clara's fingers moved gracefully, effortlessly. The music was unlike anything the audience had expected. It wasn't just beautiful, it was emotional. It felt like a story being told without words. A story of pain, loss, hope, and quiet strength. The kind of story that makes a person forget where they are for a few minutes. Some guests closed their eyes, feeling every note. Others stared at her, wondering how someone who looked so ordinary could create something so extraordinary. The rich man didn't move. His glass of wine sat untouched on the table. Minutes passed, and the music filled every corner of the hall. It seemed to wrap around people, pulling them in, breaking down walls they didn't even know they had. The melody changed from sadness to light, from struggle to victory, and then, suddenly, it was over. The final note hung in the air for a few seconds and then faded into silence. For a brief moment, no one moved. The room was completely still. Then, all at once, the audience erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping, it was real, heartfelt, almost desperate applause. People stood up. Some even shouted, "Bravo!" Clara sat quietly, her hands still resting on the keys. She opened her eyes, surprised by the reaction. She hadn't played for applause. She had played because, for the first time in years, she needed to. The rich man was the last to stand. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at her, his face pale and thoughtful. For someone used to being in control of every situation, he looked lost. The arrogance that had filled his eyes earlier was gone. When Clara finally stood and gave a small bow, people kept clapping. The host rushed over, smiling wide. "That was incredible," he said breathlessly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Clara smiled softly. "It's been a long time," she replied. As she stepped down from the stage, the rich man's eyes followed her. He didn't smirk anymore. He didn't speak. He just watched as the woman he had mocked moments ago disappeared into the crowd, back to her quiet corner, back to her work. The room buzzed with excitement. People were talking about her, asking who she was. But Clara didn't stay to listen. She quietly returned to her duties, wiping tables, collecting empty glasses, pretending nothing had happened. Yet inside she felt something awaken, a spark she thought had died long ago. Later that night, when the event ended and the guests began to leave, the rich man lingered. He looked at the stage, then at the spot where Clara had stood moments before. Something about her performance had shaken him. It wasn't just her skill, it was the feeling behind it. He couldn't explain why, but it made him see things differently. When he finally walked out into the cool night air, his mind kept replaying the sound of the piano. It stayed with him, soft, haunting, unforgettable. Clara, meanwhile, stood alone in the empty hall after everyone had gone. She walked up to the piano once more and ran her hand gently across the keys. It felt like reconnecting with an old part of herself, one she thought she'd lost forever. She smiled quietly, then turned off the lights and left, not realizing that the small act of courage she showed that night had already started to change everything. She didn't know that someone important had seen her, that her music had left an imprint on hearts she never expected to reach. All she knew was that for the first time in a very long while, she felt alive again. The next morning, the grand hotel lobby looked just as beautiful as the night before, but the air felt different. The workers were cleaning up after the charity event, folding tablecloths and polishing glasses. The echo of the previous night's applause still seemed to linger in the air. Clara moved quietly among them, carrying trays and setting things in order. On the surface, everything looked the same, but inside, something had changed. For years, she had gone to work, served food, smiled politely, and gone home in silence. Every day felt the same, but last night broke that pattern. For a few minutes, she wasn't the quiet waitress in the corner. She was something else, someone who made people stop and listen, someone who reminded them that beauty could come from unexpected places. Still, she didn't tell anyone about it. She didn't even bring it up with her coworkers. Most of them had been too busy serving guests to notice what happened. A few had seen her play and were amazed, but Clara brushed it off. It was just a small thing, she said. But deep down, her heart still carried the sound of that moment. While she wiped tables, she noticed the rich man from the night before walking through the lobby. He was dressed in a fine suit, his hair perfectly combed, his shoes shining as always. Normally, she would have looked away quickly, avoiding eye contact. But this time, she couldn't help but notice that something about him seemed different too. His usual confidence was still there, but his face looked thoughtful, like he was searching for something. He stopped by the piano, the same one she had played. He looked at it for a few seconds, then ran his hand gently across the keys. Clara watched quietly from a distance. It was strange seeing him like that. The night before, he had laughed at her. Now he looked almost curious. One of the hotel managers walked up to him and greeted him warmly. "Good morning, sir," the manager said. "Did you enjoy the event last night?" The rich man nodded slowly. "Yes," he replied. "More than I expected." He paused, still looking at the piano. "That woman who played, who was she?" The manager blinked. "Oh, you mean the pianist? "I think she was just one of the staff," he said casually. "A waitress, I believe." Surprised us all. The rich man didn't say anything for a moment. Then he asked quietly, "What's her name?" The manager hesitated. "I believe it's Clara," he said. "She's been with us for a few months. Works hard, never complains. Why do you ask?" The rich man didn't answer. He simply nodded and walked away, lost in thought. Later that day, while Clara was cleaning one of the dining areas, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and froze when she saw him standing there. The same man who had mocked her just hours before was now standing quietly, hands in his pockets, looking nothing like the arrogant figure she remembered. "Excuse me," he said in a calm voice. "You're Clara, right?" She nodded, unsure what to say. He smiled faintly. "I wanted to thank you for last night. Your music was incredible." Clara's hands tightened around the cloth she was holding. She wasn't used to being praised, especially not by people like him. "Thank you," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. He watched her for a moment. "You're very talented," he said. "I've been to concerts, heard famous performers, but what you played, there was something different about it." Clara gave a small smile. "It's just something I've always loved doing," she replied. He tilted his head slightly. "Always? You've been trained, haven't you?" Her smile faded. She didn't answer right away. After a pause, she said quietly, "A long time ago, before things changed." He could sense there was more to the story, but he didn't press. "Well, I hope you haven't stopped," he said kindly. It would be a shame to let that kind of gift go to waste. Clara thanked him again and went back to her work. But after he left, she couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. It had been years since anyone talked to her about music like that. That evening, after finishing her shift, Clara walked home slowly through the quiet streets. She lived in a small apartment not far from the hotel. It wasn't much, just a simple room with old furniture and a small window that looked out over the city lights. She sat on the edge of her bed and thought about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Her fingers itched to play again. There was no piano in her room, but she imagined one just like she used to when she was younger. Her hands moved through the air as if pressing invisible keys, and the memory of the sound filled her mind. Back at the hotel, the rich man couldn't get the melody out of his head either. It followed him through the day, soft, haunting, unforgettable. He tried focusing on his work, but every time he sat in his office, he could hear that same tune playing somewhere deep inside his thoughts. For years, his life had been about numbers, meetings, profits, and prestige. Everything he did was measured in success and control. But the night before, when that woman sat at the piano and played, something had stirred in him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He found himself wondering what her story was, why someone so talented was working as a waitress. He didn't know, but he wanted to find out. A few days later, the hotel hosted another small event, and Clara was assigned to serve there again. When she walked into the room, she was surprised to see the rich man talking with the manager. He noticed her immediately and gave her a polite nod. This time there was no smirk, no arrogance in his eyes, only respect. During a break, he approached her again. "Clara," he said gently, "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I was wondering, would you consider performing again? I'd like to arrange something, maybe a small gathering just for a few people." She stared at him, unsure if he was serious. "Perform again?" she repeated. "I'm not sure I could. It's been a long time." He smiled encouragingly. "You said that last time, and look what happened." Clara hesitated. She wanted to say no, to stay in her safe, quiet world, but deep down, something in her wanted to say yes. "I'll think about it," she finally said. That night, as she walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. Perform again. The idea scared her, but it also filled her with warmth. She remembered what it felt like to be herself, to lose herself in music, to forget everything else for a little while. The next morning, she arrived early at work. The lobby was empty, and the piano sat quietly in the corner, gleaming under the morning light. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then walked over and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment before pressing the first note. The sound echoed softly, warm and gentle. She smiled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a waitress pretending to be someone else. She felt like herself again. She didn't notice that the rich man had entered the lobby quietly. He stopped near the doorway, listening. There it was again. The the same melody that had stayed in his mind since that night. He didn't interrupt her. He just listened, a faint smile on his face. When she finished and realized he was there, she looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't be playing during work hours," he shook his head. "Don't apologize. You made my morning better." There was silence between them for a moment. Then he said softly, "Music like that shouldn't be hidden. The world needs to hear it again." Clara didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to people believing in her. But somehow, the way he said it made her believe it could be possible. As the morning light spread across the lobby and touched the piano keys, both of them stood there quietly, two people from completely different worlds, connected by something simple yet powerful. Neither of them knew that this small moment was only the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. A few days had passed since that quiet morning at the piano. Clara went about her work as usual, serving guests, clearing tables, and keeping everything in order. She had returned to her routine, but the memory of the rich man watching her the way he had listened quietly lingered in her mind. It was strange. For someone who had always seemed distant and untouchable, he had shown a kind of respect she had rarely experienced. That evening, the hotel announced a small gathering for select guests, an intimate music event. The rich man had requested it personally. Clara learned of it only when the manager approached her, looking slightly nervous. "Clara," he said, "there's a small event tonight. They would like you to play again." She froze. The thought of performing in front of people again filled her with fear and doubt. Memories of her past, of the mistakes and losses she had endured, came rushing back. She had almost convinced herself to say no when the manager added, "They are very specific guests, very supportive. It's not a big crowd. You'll be fine." Clara nodded slowly. She didn't feel fine, but she knew she couldn't refuse. Something deep inside her, a spark she thought had been lost, urged her to go. The event hall was smaller than the main lobby. Candles flickered on tables and soft lighting made the room warm and inviting. A few dozen guests gathered, chatting quietly. Many of them were familiar faces from the charity event, but this time the atmosphere felt different. There was no show of wealth, no mocking smiles. Instead, it felt as if everyone was waiting for something real. Clara's heart pounded as she walked toward the piano. Her hands trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath and sat down. The rich man was there in the front row, watching intently. He didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He simply waited. She closed her eyes, letting the nerves fade away. Her fingers found the keys and the first notes flowed out softly. The melody was gentle, filled with the kind of emotion that didn't need explanation. It was a story she had carried inside her for years. A story of hope after despair, of quiet strength, of moving forward even when life had been cruel. As she played, she noticed faces in the crowd changing. People leaned forward, listening with rapt attention. Some eyes glistened with tears. Others smiled quietly, touched by the depth of the music. And the rich man, he was no longer just observing. His posture had changed. He leaned slightly forward, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on her with admiration. She didn't think about him as she played. She didn't think about the crowd. All that existed was the music, the piano, and the story she wanted to tell through every note. The melody rose and fell, moving from sorrow to light, from hesitation to courage. It was as if the piano itself was speaking, sharing secrets long buried in silence. When she finally ended, the room was quiet for a moment. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with awe, as if everyone was catching their breath after witnessing something rare and real. Then slowly applause began. It started soft but grew louder and stronger until the entire room clapped, some standing, some wiping tears from their eyes. The rich man stood as well, this time without hesitation. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw him smile, not a polite or mocking smile, but one of genuine amazement and respect. After the performance, the manager approached her again. "Clara, that was extraordinary," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Everyone is talking about it. You have to consider performing more often." Clara shook her head softly. I'm just a waitress," she said, trying to downplay it. The rich man walked toward her then, and the room seemed to pause for a moment. He stopped in front of her, looking her in the eyes. "You are more than that," he said quietly. "You are a musician, a storyteller, someone who makes people feel something they didn't know they could feel. Don't hide that." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to protest, to say she wasn't ready, but she found she couldn't. His words stirred something inside her, something she had long buried under fear and doubt. "You really think I could do it again?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Absolutely. And I will help you if you let me. You deserve to be heard." For the first time in years, Clara felt hope. Not the fragile, fleeting kind, but a steady, quiet hope that grew with every heartbeat. She nodded slowly. Maybe I can try." That night, after the gathering ended and the guests had left, Clara stayed behind at the piano for a few minutes. She ran her hands gently across the keys, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingers. The rich man had gone, leaving her in quiet solitude, and yet she didn't feel alone. The music had awakened a part of her that had been silent for too long, and she knew she couldn't let it go again. Over the next few days, she found herself returning to the piano whenever she could. She played in empty halls, in quiet corners whenever her duties allowed. With every note, she regained confidence, rediscovered joy, and healed little pieces of her heart she hadn't even realized were broken. The rich man continued to watch from a distance. He didn't interfere, didn't demand attention, didn't try to control her. He simply admired her courage and her talent. He began arranging small opportunities for her to perform, quietly contacting people he knew would support her, people who cared more about the music than about appearances. Clara was hesitant at first. The thought of performing in front of strangers again scared her. But she remembered the way she had felt the first time she played for him and for the audience, alive, free, and truly herself. That feeling was worth more than any fear. One afternoon, as she practiced quietly in the hotel lobby before her next performance, a young girl approached her. The girl was shy, barely peeking around the piano, holding her mother's hand. "Are you the one who played at the event?" the girl asked softly. Clara smiled gently. "Yes," she said. The girl's eyes lit up. "I want to play piano like that," she whispered. "I want to feel it too." Clara felt her heart swell. She knelt down beside the girl. "You can," she said softly. "You just need to believe and practice. Music isn't just about skill, it's about feeling. It comes from here." She tapped gently on her chest. "Here. If you let it, it will guide your hands." The girl nodded, a small smile spreading across her face. Her mother watched quietly, her eyes misty. Clara realized that her music wasn't just about her anymore. It had the power to inspire, to touch hearts, to change lives. That evening, she played for the next small gathering. The rich man was there again in the front row, listening intently. As she finished, he stood immediately, applauding along with everyone else. This time, he didn't just stand in awe. He approached her afterward. "You've touched so many people tonight," he said quietly. "Including me. I don't think I've ever felt this way before." "It's incredible," Clara smiled softly. "I'm just glad it reaches them," she said. He nodded. "It reaches everyone who hears it. And it's time the world hears more of it. You deserve to be recognized for this." The words were simple, but they carried weight. For Clara, they weren't just encouragement. They were permission to believe in herself again. She realized that night that her music could no longer remain hidden. She had a gift, and it wasn't meant to be kept secret. As she walked home that night, the city lights reflected in her eyes, and for the first time in many years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Music was no longer just a memory. It was her life again, her voice, her story. And the rich man who had once smirked at her had become an unlikely supporter, someone who believed in her when she had forgotten how to believe in herself. Clara didn't know what the future held. She didn't know where this journey would take her. But she knew one thing: she was ready to face it, one note at a time, and let her music shine. And somewhere in the shadows, watching quietly but always present, the rich man knew he had witnessed something extraordinary. He understood more than he could say, that talent and courage often come from the most unexpected places, and that one simple act of stepping forward could change everything. The days after her small performance passed in a blur for Clara. Work remained the same: serving food, cleaning tables, moving quietly through the hotel halls. But her mind was no longer consumed with just survival. Music had returned to her life like a gentle tide, filling spaces she had long thought empty. Every free moment she had, she spent at the piano, letting her fingers rediscover the melodies she had forgotten. The rich man had kept his distance, but had begun quietly arranging opportunities for her. Small events, private gatherings, and even meetings with people who could help her reconnect with her lost world of music. Clara was hesitant at first, unsure if she was ready. Her life had been simple, and stepping back into the world she had left behind was intimidating. But the memory of the night she first played, and the awe in the eyes of the man who had mocked her, reminded her that she could do this. One afternoon, she was practicing alone in the lobby when the hotel manager approached her. "Clara, there's someone here who wants to meet you," he said. She looked up and saw the rich man standing just beyond the doorway, his hands in his pockets, watching quietly. He didn't smile as he often did. Instead, his expression was serious, almost thoughtful. "Hello, Clara," he said softly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." She shook her head. "No, it's fine. I've been thinking about your music," he began, "and I think it's time more people hear it. I'd like to organize a small concert for you here at the hotel. Nothing big at first, just a few guests who will appreciate your talent. If you're willing, I'll handle everything. You only have to play." Clara hesitated. Her heart pounded and doubt crept in. "I don't know if I can," she said softly. "I haven't performed for a real audience in years." He stepped closer. "I understand, but I've seen what happens when you play. People listen and it changes them. And it changed me. You have a gift, Clara, and it's time you share it. I promise to make it as easy as possible for you." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. She realized that he wasn't expecting her to perform for fame or money. He wanted people to feel what she could create, to connect with the beauty she carried inside. She nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "I'll try." The preparations began quietly. The rich man called a few trusted people, and soon the lobby was arranged with soft lighting, candles, and chairs set neatly for the guests. Clara watched as everything came together and felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She had not performed like this in so long, and the thought of being in the spotlight again made her stomach twist. When the guests arrived, Clara was ready. The rich man was there in the front row, watching silently. He had arranged the seating so that the audience could focus on her, not the surroundings. Everyone was attentive, waiting to hear what this once-hidden pianist could do. Clara took a deep breath and sat at the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment before touching them lightly. The first note sounded soft and delicate, then another, and soon the room was filled with music. She didn't play the notes mechanically. She played with her heart, letting the stories inside her guide every chord. The music rose and fell, carrying with it emotion, memories, and hope. Every note seemed to speak directly to the listeners, reaching a place deeper than words ever could. The guests were silent, absorbed completely in the sound. Some leaned forward, tears glimmering in their eyes. Others closed their eyes, lost in the emotion of the moment. And the rich man? He was captivated, as if discovering a part of life he had never known existed. When she finished, the applause was immediate and strong. It was genuine, heartfelt, and unlike anything she had experienced before. The rich man stood with everyone else clapping, but there was something more in his eyes: pride, awe, and respect. Afterward, he approached her. "Clara, that was remarkable," he said quietly. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone play like that. Not just skill, but everything behind it. You've given everyone here a gift tonight." Clara smiled a little shyly. "Thank you, I play what I feel. That's all I know how to do." He nodded. "And that's why it's extraordinary. People can feel that. It's rare and it should be shared." Over the next weeks, Clara continued to practice and perform. The rich man remained a constant supporter, always respectful, never overbearing. He arranged private sessions with musicians who had connections in the music world, people who could guide her back into performing without pressure or judgment. Clara began to see that her music could reach beyond the walls of the hotel. She started teaching young children who wanted to learn, sharing not just notes and technique, but the way music could touch hearts. She realized that her gift was not just for performance, it was for connection, for helping others feel and grow. One afternoon, while teaching a small group of children, a young boy raised his hand. "Miss Clara," he said, "how do you make the piano sound so alive?" Clara knelt beside him. "It's not just about the keys," she said gently. "It's about what you put into it. Your thoughts, your feelings, everything inside you. The piano is just the way to share it. That's what makes it alive. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with understanding. Clara smiled. She felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Music was no longer just her escape, it was her purpose. Meanwhile, the rich man watched quietly from the background during these sessions. He never interfered, never demanded recognition, but he always made sure she had the support she needed. Slowly, he began to change too. His arrogance softened, replaced by humility. He started to appreciate people for who they were, not for what they could give him. Clara's courage and talent had opened his eyes to something he had forgotten, the value of real human connection. One evening, after another small gathering at the hotel, the rich man approached Clara again. "You know," he said softly, "when I first saw you play, I thought it would be amusing to watch. I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect to feel so moved. You've shown me that there's more to life than wealth, power, or status. There's beauty and courage and heart, and you reminded me of that." Clara felt a lump in her throat. She had never thought of her music as anything more than her own way to survive and express herself. Hearing that it had touched someone, especially someone so powerful, was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "No, thank you. For reminding me of what really matters." The next few months were a transformation for Clara. She performed at private events, small gatherings, and charity functions. Each time, her confidence grew, and so did her audience. People began to talk about the pianist who had once been a waitress, who could make hearts ache and soar with the stroke of a key. And through it all, she remained humble. Fame was never her goal. She wanted only to share her music, to let it reach those who needed it, and to inspire others to believe in themselves. The rich man became a quiet partner in her journey, someone who offered support without overshadowing her. He continued to learn from her courage and humility, realizing that life's most meaningful lessons often came from the most unexpected people. One night, after a small concert had ended and the guests had left, Clara sat alone at the piano. She played softly, letting her fingers wander over the keys, lost in the music. The hotel was quiet, and the only sound was the melody filling the empty space. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the doubt, the courage it took to step forward, and the people who had believed in her when she had almost forgotten how to believe in herself. A sense of peace washed over her. She realized that her journey was just beginning, and that the music would always guide her no matter where life took her. The rich man stood at the doorway watching her play. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak. He simply observed as he had from the beginning, quietly learning that true greatness often comes from humility, courage, and heart. And in that quiet moment, both of them understood something powerful. That life could change in an instant, that respect and admiration were earned in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. Weeks turned into months, and Clara's life had changed in ways she never imagined. The once quiet waitress who had worked silently in the background was now known for her music. People came to hear her play not just at the hotel but at small concerts and private gatherings arranged by the rich man and others who had discovered her talent. Each time she performed, she felt a mixture of nerves and excitement, but the fear that had once held her back was gone. Music had reclaimed her, and she moved forward with a quiet confidence. Even with the growing attention, Clara remained humble. She still performed for children learning music, teaching them not just the notes but the feeling behind each melody. She encouraged them to put their hearts into every sound, to find the courage to express themselves even when the world seemed cold or indifferent. Many of the children looked up to her, inspired not only by her talent but by her story of resilience. The rich man continued to support her quietly, arranging opportunities without drawing attention to himself. He never demanded recognition or credit, and over time he had changed too. He had learned to appreciate people for who they were, not for their wealth or status. Watching Clara had taught him a lesson he had long forgotten, that true greatness comes from courage, humility, and heart, not from money or power. One afternoon, after a small performance at the hotel, Clara was packing up her sheet music when she noticed the rich man standing nearby. This time there was a gentle smile on his face, warm and unpretentious. "Clara," he said softly, "I've been thinking. You have so much talent and it belongs to the world. You shouldn't limit it to small gatherings. I'd like to help you organize a public recital. Something meaningful, where people who truly want to listen can come and experience your music." Clara hesitated. Performing for a larger audience was daunting, but she remembered the first night she had dared to sit at the piano in front of everyone. The moment when her music had surprised even the man who had doubted her. The memory gave her courage. I think I can try," she said slowly, a small smile forming. Preparations began in earnest. Posters were quietly put up, invitations sent to people in the music community, and the hotel hall was arranged to create an intimate yet welcoming environment. Clara practiced tirelessly, often staying late after her shifts to rehearse. She poured her heart into every note, every chord, ensuring that when the day came she would give her best performance. The night of the recital arrived. Guests began arriving quietly, curious and eager to hear the pianist who had made waves in the local music scene. The room was filled with a mix of anticipation and respect, and the atmosphere was calm but electric, as if everyone sensed that something special was about to happen. Clara approached the piano and sat down. She took a deep breath, letting the familiar nerves settle into excitement. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and for a moment she closed her eyes. She remembered every step of her journey, the struggles, the doubts, the small moments of courage that had brought her here. And then softly she began to play. The music flowed naturally, effortlessly, yet each note carried emotion so powerful that the audience felt it deep in their hearts. Clara played not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever doubted themselves, who had faced loss, fear, or uncertainty, and who needed to hear that courage could overcome any obstacle. As she played, the room grew quiet. Guests leaned forward, some closing their eyes, others letting tears fall silently. Every note told a story of resilience, hope, and triumph. Every chord was a reminder that talent alone was not enough, that what mattered was the courage to step forward, even when the world expected failure. The rich man watched from the front row, completely absorbed. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by awe and admiration. He realized that this woman, whom he had once underestimated, was extraordinary, not just because of her skill, but because of her heart, her courage, and the way she shared her gift without ego or expectation. When the final note faded, the room was silent for a moment, suspended in the beauty of what they had just experienced. Then applause erupted, strong and genuine, filling the hall. Some guests stood, some cried quietly, some clapped as if they had been waiting for this moment all their lives. Clara stood slowly, feeling a mixture of relief and joy. She gave a small bow, her heart racing but calm, knowing she had done everything she could to let her music speak. The rich man rose from his seat, clapping more enthusiastically than anyone else. He approached her afterward, his expression full of respect. "You were incredible," he said softly. "I don't think I've ever witnessed anything like that. Not just the music, but the feeling behind it. You've touched so many people tonight, including me." Clara smiled, a little shyly. "Thank you, I played what I felt." "That's exactly why it was so powerful," he said. "It's rare to see someone play from the heart like that. Most people perform for applause or recognition. You play for something much deeper." In the days and weeks that followed, Clara's music continued to reach more people. Invitations came from schools, local organizations, and even larger venues. She began teaching more students, guiding them not only in technique but in courage, showing them that setbacks and hardships were part of the journey, not the end of it. Her life had transformed completely. No longer was she just a waitress quietly working behind the scenes. She had found her voice again, her purpose, and a way to make a difference in the lives of others. And through it all, the rich man remained a constant presence, not as a patron seeking glory, but as someone who had learned to value the human heart and spirit. One afternoon, as Clara was teaching a group of children, she noticed the rich man standing quietly at the back of the room. He didn't speak or interrupt, just watched, listening to her guide and inspire the children. He had changed too, softened by humility and respect for the courage it took to follow one's heart. He had learned that wealth and status could never replace the impact of genuine talent and kindness. After the session ended, he approached her again. "Clara," he said, "I just wanted to say, thank you. You've reminded me of something important, that life isn't about controlling everything or impressing others. It's about heart, courage, and connection. You've shown me that in a way I will never forget." Clara felt a warmth in her chest. She had never thought that her music could affect someone like him, someone so distant and powerful. Yet here he was, speaking from the heart, acknowledging the lessons he had learned from her courage and talent. "You've also given others hope," he continued. "People who may have doubted themselves or felt forgotten have seen what's possible because of you." "That's a rare gift," Clara smiled softly. "I never expected that. I just wanted to play." "That's why it's so powerful," he said. "You didn't play to impress anyone. You played to share yourself. That's something the world needs more of." Months turned into a year, and Clara's journey continued to grow. She performed at concerts, taught students, and inspired many through her music. She never sought fame or wealth. She sought only to connect, to express, and to help others find courage through music. And the rich man continued to support her quietly, learning from her humility and compassion. Through it all, Clara never forgot the first night she had dared to sit at the piano in front of strangers. When the man who had mocked her had stood in awe, that moment had changed everything, not just for him but for her. It had been the beginning of a journey that led her back to herself, to her music, and to the realization that courage and talent could open doors no one imagined. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, Clara sat alone at the piano. The room was quiet and she played softly, her fingers moving over the keys as the melody filled the space. She thought about the children she had taught, the audiences she had moved, and the lives she had touched through music. And she thought about the man who had once doubted her, who had become one of her strongest supporters. She realized something important. Her journey was not just about music. It was about resilience, courage, and the power of believing in oneself even when the world seemed to dismiss you. It was about sharing one's gifts not for recognition or reward, but because they were meant to be shared. The rich man, standing quietly in the doorway, listened to her play. He had witnessed her growth, her courage, and her impact on others. And in that moment, he understood something he would never forget: that greatness was not measured by wealth, power, or status, but by the hearts we touch, the courage we show, and the authenticity with which we live our lives. Clara finished her piece and sat back, taking a deep breath. She smiled, not at the applause or recognition, but at the knowledge that she had found herself again. Her music had healed her, guided her, and allowed her to inspire others. And through it all, she remained grounded, humble, and true to herself. Life had changed in an instant that first night, when she had dared to touch the piano and let the music flow. What had started as a quiet, uncertain moment had grown into a life filled with purpose, connection, and meaning. And as Clara looked out over the quiet room, she knew that the journey was far from over, but that every note she played would continue to carry courage, hope, and heart to everyone willing to listen. The world had finally heard her music, and in doing so, it had revealed her true strength. The rich man who had once smirked at her had learned to stand in awe not only of her talent, but of her spirit. And Clara, who had once doubted herself, had discovered the extraordinary power of stepping forward, embracing courage, and sharing one's gifts with the world. In the end, it wasn't fame or wealth that defined her success. It was the lives she touched, the hearts she moved, and the courage she inspired. And in that, Clara had truly found everything she had lost and more.